Hi, today's September 9th, 2024, and I'm honored to have Aaron Day with us today. And he's a serial entrepreneur, and he's my expert and probably the world's expert on what we need to fear, kind of the war on money, I guess. Yesterday, we did the war on food. And a lot of these things fall under the dreaded word, I guess, now, technocracy. Aaron, can you tell us what is technocracy? What's going on with CBDCs? What are the pieces that you've had to kind of rankle the beast out there?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me back. There's actually quite a bit that has changed in the, I guess it's been a few months since I was on. From a technocracy perspective, technocracy is basically, a form of government where elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions for people. I mean, it's essentially the end of free will. And this is what the WEF and the UN are pushing for. And this technocracy movement started in the 1930s. And it's, gone through fits and starts. It picked up again in the 1970s with the founding of the Trilateral Commission, who really picked up the ball and moved things forward and started to integrate these concepts with the United Nations. And that ultimately has become kind of the basis for the UN Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's really the impetus that's driving everything that's going on. And so I think it's important that people understand that there is a strategy going on. I think oftentimes one of the mistakes, people will look at something like COVID and say, well, this was just a few bad apples, or there were a few bad actors involved, and that's why we got into this predicament. But when you actually study it, you'll find out that what we are experiencing right now is the deliberate outcome of decades of kind of engineering and investment. And if I had to summarize the core of technocracy, it's the desire to convert the economy from a price-based system to an energy credit-based system. So at the heart of it is they actually want to move even how we think about money to being tied to, in essence, carbon credits.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I forgot to mention you're a Brownstone fellow, so you've been writing for Brownstone. How did you coincide with Brownstone? What's the message there, and what's technocracy is just kind of a word. This kind of sounds kind of harmless. We like technology. We understand, I guess, bureaucracy. How did we get here? I'm actually going to put up a poster from Ian Davis that Professor David Hughes, who's also a Brownstone fellow and was on my show last week, brought to my attention. It's kind of it's kind of got the color scheme of an Al Qaeda flag. It's black background, white lettering, lots of dense lettering. And maybe that's supposed to put a chill on us as well. A lot of the actors, are these, kind of three-letter organizations out there. What's swirling around, and why does it coincide with money? I mean, they say money is the root of all evil. It's also the only way to get stuff. So it's also kind of the conduit for all good and all goods, I guess, plural. I had Tracy Thurman on yesterday, and her feeling is that the war on food has to do with control issues. Tell us a little bit about, the commonality of those themes, and I'll try to pull up the poster in the meanwhile.
Well, the basis of technocracy, as I said, is the idea of converting from a price-based system to an energy credit-based system. So in essence, and I outline in my article, you may own nothing sooner than you think, actually how this process is going to work. It starts with creating CBDCs, which I'll actually discuss later. We actually already have a CBDC that we're just actually now talking about the levels of tyranny involved with the CBDC. But basically, it's the ability to control digital money at a very granular level. And what they're building is something where not only are they going to what's called tokenize money so that it can be programmed, monitored, and censored, they're actually creating what's called a common ledger, where they're going to tokenize all of our assets, non-monetary assets as well. So stocks, bonds, your mortgage, all of those are going to be digitized and tokenized and put on the same platform with CBDCs, which will give them the control and the ability to program, track, and censor all of our assets, not just our money. I mean, everything down to Your computer could be tokenized, your car, your house. That's how, in the end, we'll own nothing and be happy. But well, we won't be happy. But that's how they further that agenda, is through this centralized tokenization. And money is the core of it. Once they can program and control your money, they have complete control over your behavior. So this fits into food freedom. It fits into food freedom in the sense of they can actually determine and program what you can and cannot buy as far as food is concerned. In fact, ultimately, they will tie your digital money, your CBDC, to a social credit score. And what I've outlined in my book is that I believe that social credit score system will be basically the 17 sustainable development goals of the UN. If you take those 17 and you turn them into a behavior system, and you said to yourself, if my goal was to control the global economy based on an energy credit based system, what behavior would I measure and what behaviors would I reward and punish based on these 17 sustainable development goals? And then so all of that then is tracked back to your CBDC. So if you buy a gas stove, if you drive too many miles beyond your allotment, on and on and on. I mean, you can go through each one of these things and actually see how you could create a punishment reward system tied to energy credits. So I believe CBDCs are the heart of the digital control system. And when I talk about digitization and tokenization, so they can control with a CBDC what foods you can buy. So you can't buy raw milk anymore. You can't buy meat anymore, because they're actually developing what's called, I believe, the whole earth diet. It's also called the Lancet diet. And this Lancet diet essentially almost completely eliminates red meat as part of it. It actually adds added sugar as an element of the food. It's not even a food pyramid. It's more of a pie chart, which there is absolutely no nutritional need for added sugar in a diet. And this is where it introduces things like insect protein. So you're actually seeing this. So, and when you read the guidelines for this Lancet diet, you might think that human health is a priority in developing dietary guidelines, and it's not. They actually weight the different elements. So they would actually consider the earth and the environment and all of these other manufactured scarcity things that they're developing from on high. They factor all of those things in. Human health is not at the top 3 list of the priorities of these new dietary guidelines. And so that gives you a sense of how that gets tied into not only money, but when they start digitizing assets, your ability to even trade, they're going to digitize and tokenize the supply chain. So your ability to even sell something, your ability to sell raw milk or organic vegetables or meat, you'll be denied access to the system. So not only will what you have to buy and sell be tokenized, but then it's CBDCs that will be the only currency you can use to buy and sell those things. So there's a more profound issue here than just tokenized money. It's actually the tokenization of the assets themselves. And so this affects every category. So anybody who's an activist for any cause should be primarily concerned with CBDCs because it controls behavior. And so whatever your issue is, you'll have a very hard time advocating for it if your money is shut off for doing so.
Yeah, I had a kind of a blurry picture of the planetary diet there. I'll try to get a better one. There was only a that tiny sliver, it's like the moon the day before it's a new moon. That much was, like a 2% animal protein. That's part of your diet. And the rest of it, I guess, is foraging. And
it's designed like that based on their perception of carbon. That is the explanation for it. It's not.
Yeah,
they didn't. Yeah.
It's so silly. Because, frankly, a lot of animals are more efficient at grazing than we are. If I could get, I don't know who'd listen, Greta Thunberg or the president of the UN or Tedros at the WHO or Soros or whatever, I'd kind of grab them by that. I mean, you could look eye to eye. There's some animals that can look eye to eye and others can't. We tend to like the animals that can have, their eyes in front. There are pets, like cats and dogs and whatnot. And we have a little more sympathy with pigs than we might with chickens and so forth. But the animals on the sides of their head are prey usually, and they are grazers, rabbits and whatnot. And the animals with their eyes in front of their head have stereoscopic vision. We have it because we hunt. So if you look at a hawk versus a robin, maybe the robin is a bad example, but a lot of finches and whatnot. they have their eyes on their side because they're watching out for other animals that might eat them, squirrels and so forth. Whereas we have our eyes in front because we hunt. And so, we grab things, and we have, prehensile hands, with has nothing to do with post and prehensile, but to grabbing, to apprehend things, to pull things in. So that's what we are. It's what we've always been. And so it's kind of like anomalous to our, personal biologic mission to eat only vegetables. Now, we can be omnivores. We can eat other things. Like even my dog will eat other stuff. We give our dogs, actually, it's a reasonable analogy to what kind of we're going to be put on. Like the dog will get the taste of meat. There's basically Rachel Ray's got some, beef flavored grains. We're getting a lot of stuff that the grains that we can't even put into like, Special K or cornflakes. We put into the dog food, and we kind of have a tincture of the meat that we can't even, get into a hot dog and so forth. And then we call that dog food. And if you put a little extra meat in, they're happier because they are carnivores. So are we. And so I like to put that at, and obviously the concept of diet is evolving as far as personal health, but I don't think they're interested in personal health. I don't think they're interested in individual liberty. I think they're interested in managing, kind of, so that we are the grazing animals that are cattle-ized, corralled, and functionalized to their taste. And the number of us, how much we do, where we go, it's kind of annoying at the very least. I was going to put up some of the actors who have it, but I don't know if you want to comment on that part.
Sure.
How do you see, what do you see if we had the kind of the UN goals? I'll see if I can put those up as well. We have the UN goals up there, and they all seem really nicey kind of things. Like people, it seems like the left always monopolizes the words. Affirmative action. How could you not be against some action that's affirmative? And equity and inclusion, diversity. You couldn't possibly be against those things unless you're a bad person. But the goals that they have on that UN list, I bet one by one, that's their conception of what is the right type of peace. It's their conception of what is quote unquote gender equality, and how many genders they are. Well, probably right there they all seem to only have 2, but I'm sure they can have 30 or 15, whatever they feel like having, and that would be the right thing, the right way to think. And this is kind of the essence of political correctness, not so much what is right or wrong, but what it becomes the political movement, and the only thing you're allowed to think is right or wrong. And so where did all this come from? What's the genesis of these concepts, and how does it play out? And maybe you can also define CBDC. A lot of times I hear it, I think of cannabis with CBD, but it's an easy way to remember it. CBD, central bank digital currency. Tell us where we are on the track of that, and how that relates to kind of, having a credit card and being tracked.
Sure. Well, so we wanted to talk about the players behind this. So I would say the technocracy movement itself goes back to 1930s, and there's an organization called Technocracy Inc., which still exists today. It actually flourished. You can actually Google them and you'll find some really interesting pictures. I mean, it was a true-on cult where they would wear all the same suit. It was all the same color of gray. It was actually to the point where they'd become so sophisticated as an organization that General Motors adopted a technocracy gray color. So people were driving around. They actually had their own salutes, their own uniforms, their own color for their cars. And so this is where this really kicked off. But then they had a civil war in the 30s, and it didn't kill it, but it hampered it. But it was really brought back by Brzezinski with the found. There you go. There's some great images. It was brought back in the early 70s by Brzezinski, who made it kind of part of the Trilateral Commission and this whole push for globalization and technocracy. And so to me, when we talk about the organizations that are, I look at the UN, the WEF, the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, and the World Bank as front organizations for this. And so, yeah, you've got all, so these are exactly the same people here. And I talk about this in my book, this other level, this you have the Council on Foreign Relations, Club of Rome. Club of Rome is where we get the scarcity model. The Club of Rome has been putting out material about we're all going to die. And the whole kind of narrative around carbon and all of that alarmism. I mean, even when you go back to Time magazine and everybody kind of pushing cover stories about the end of the world and things related to scarcity, that tracks back to the Club of Rome. But you also have the Trilateral Commission, which I don't see on there. I think the Trilateral Commission is probably one of the most powerful organizations behind this. The organization was started in, I think, 1972, and trilateral means North America, Europe, and Asia. And basically what they've done, their approach is to infiltrate governments from the top down. So for instance, in Jimmy Carter's administration, all but one member of his cabinet was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Every president since Carter has had multiple members of the Trilateral Commission, and usually the Secretary of Commerce, which is, by the way, what is involved with developing trade relationships, hence the push for globalization, have almost all exclusively been Trilateral Commission members. So they've done this in North America, Europe, and Asia. So they've been basically pushing their agenda for the top, from the top down. So this is why when I say to people are like, oh, well, politics is grassroots. And it's like, when you actually understand the selection process for presidential candidates, and then furthermore, how the process works beyond that for the cabinets, you'll realize that there's already kind of a shadow government going on. So that, and then you have the Bilderberg Group. And so these are the organizations that are behind the scenes pushing this agenda. And when you look at, so like the UN, the people at the UN aren't designing these strategies. The people at the UN are, the best way I can describe it is using taxpayer funds to match the efforts of the, multinational corporations, the WEF companies, to push the technocracy agenda, but to use the force of the state through the UN and to use matching taxpayer funds to push the agenda. So at no point is Tedros a, mastermind or the visionary pushing this. He's just a replaceable functionary and a figurehead that is acceptable and palatable to the world for pushing the agendas of these elites behind the scenes. And so when you look at the WEF, and this is the thing, because a lot of times people are like, oh, this is a conspiracy theory, which of course the CIA even pushed and came up with the idea of conspiracy theorists to basically prevent people from talking about inconvenient truths. But when you track this, and I put a lot of this in my book, I'm not using other people's opinions for putting together my conclusions. You can actually use their direct information as primary source material. So you use, WEF documents, UN documents, information directly from the Club of Rome. There's a great guy named Patrick Wood who has been a terrific, he's for 4 decades plus, he's been tracking the Trilateral Commission, Technocracy, and he's even compiled a database of who all of the Trilateral Commission members are. And I asked him for it, and he actually sent it to me. So it's not a public list, but he's been documenting it every year for 40 years. So he knows who goes on and who goes off. I think they serve 3-year terms. So, Jamie Dimon from Chase has been on. Currently, Larry Fink is on. So Jamie Dimon isn't technically on the board now, but he has been. And when you look at the composition of the Trilateral Commission, it's about half executives from multinational corporations. And then the other half is divided of people in the media, academia, and politicians. And so it's an interesting distribution. But to me, those are the people, and it's similarly sized. There are 400 to 500 people in the Trilateral Commission. I think 400 people or so in the Club of Rome. So when you take those 4 kind of shadow organizations and put them all together, because there's a lot of overlapping board members and participation, I mean, you're dealing with, 1,000, 1,500 people that are really the ones pushing this agenda through these other organizations, including large corporations that are WEF partner companies.
So it's exhausting, like all the battles you have to keep fighting just to kind of keep, people out of your way. The kind of classic conservative is leave me alone. Leave me alone. Let me do my stuff. That seems very hard for others. Why is that? And what's the ultimate goal for them? I mean, they have these kind of nebulous things, although kumbaya, again, things hard to argue with. I like having a clean world. I like people to have a sense of fairness, and I don't want wars. all that kind of stuff. But I always think that they tend to misjudge these things. I mean, we can just see the management of COVID, having strange and impossible ideals and ideas. This concept of zero COVID in 2022. I'm going to bore you for 1 second, but ages ago I had this dream. It's stuck with me because it's so absurd. I was in such tension and pressure. I had this huge cube of ice that like they used to sell in the a century ago, and it was a swelteringly hot day, and I was tasked with a lion tamer whip to keep that ice from melting. And so I was working so hard, but it was swelteringly hot. I was exhausted and hot, and I was supposed to somehow train the ice to keep it from melting, but it was going to melt nonetheless. But this kind of level of control that people have to have, and it was, I guess, some kind of controlled dream. I don't know. I have to find my psychiatrist or psychologist to interpret it for me. But it seems that so many people have this urge to control that which they cannot, and they can't let the thing be. The ice at that point wants to melt. It doesn't have desires, but it's going to melt. That's the natural impulse for it. We have, lives that are, relatively brief. We have joys and pleasures within it. I think they're in some strange way keeping the world safe for themselves. And getting back to the example with the ice, I guess for zero COVID was that they wanted that ice not to melt. They wanted nobody to get COVID. And mind you, it was only Omicron, which is not really a linear descendant of SARS-CoV-2. So China had put on, they put the lockdowns all back on again. They wanted, whipping that ice cube so that nobody would get Omicron. It's idiotic. And society, Shanghai, has industries and whatnot, and they were keeping the city locked down. And they had these skeleton staffs to run their companies, and they made people stay overnight at the companies, not travel back crazy stuff. And so these are the people we're supposed to trust, essentially, with all these other little, cute little boxes of the UN chart there. And if we can't trust them with the basics of health and understanding that they can't keep people from getting basically a respiratory cold virus, then how can we trust them with anything else? And then why should we? And then, what do we do?
So I think that their intention wasn't necessarily to limit the damage of COVID. I mean, I actually think that this was just a matter of intentionally putting in place more control and surveillance infrastructure. Because you'll notice every time this happens, they put in gigantic changes, whether it's contact tracing, where you can actually tokenize and trace human beings, to more AI and cameras. They never wind that back. So every time we have an emergency like that, which, by the way, I think is part of the point, because the end goal for this is a form of technocracy. And again, you have to understand, this is the hardest part for people to understand, because people will say, oh, well, we have the Constitution. You have to understand, when you see somebody like Peter Hotez and you see some of these other people, it actually helps describe some of their behavior. Peter Hotez didn't want to debate RFK. He's blocked me. He's blocked most people, and that anybody that dissents, and because he holds the opinion that he's one of the elite and that we're not capable. It doesn't matter what the quality of our argument is for debate. He's part of the elite. We're not. And their worldview is that they should have unilateral decision-making power. So they don't even consider our rights. Now, as to what the motivation is, I mean, this is the hardest part about this, because a lot of people want to get into conspiracy theories around, oh, it's these bloodlines, and it's this versus that, Jesuits and Freemasons. And I don't go there, simply because it's not necessary. From what I can tell, I'm going to paint what I think is the best case scenario. The best case scenario is they really believe this. They believe that we are going to destroy the planet and destroy ourselves, and that we have this situation of scarcity, and that they truly believe that the only solution out of it is the application of technology to the human condition, and that the only way to effectively and efficiently apply technology to the human condition is to have the best scientists and engineers. And of course, it's only the elite that can do this. Now, the problem with this, as you said, this model doesn't work out very well. I mean, certainly communists have tried this. We had Lukashenko during the Soviet phase and the tens of millions that died of starvation. You had the Great Leap Forward in China. It's not like this approach hasn't been tried before. It's been tried and it's always failed. But even if you give them the best of intentions, here's what the problem is. The problem is there's what we know, there's what we know we don't know, and there's what we don't know we don't know. And the what we don't know is almost infinite in comparison to the other two slices of the pie. And in fact, that unknown is where all the magic happens, where all of the creation and all the invention happens. This technocratic model basically says all that is known is what we know. So the smallest slice of the pie. And what they then try to do, even with good intentions of saving humanity, is take this, 0.0001% of knowledge and make that the fixed set of what is possible for humanity, because they're literally determining from the top down what can and cannot even be explored. So that's why it's problematic what they're doing, even if their intentions are good. Because I would argue, you could argue a lot of things about scarcity, but one of the biggest problems is most inventions happen not from people that go through the indoctrination. They come from outside. It comes from outside of the box thinking, or from interdisciplinary thinking. It comes from the unexpected. That's where most huge breakthroughs happen. And when you have a technocratic system, you lock in what you can even look at. And then you have all of these, kind of like how academia works, structures where the people at the top actually don't want to be challenged. They want whatever their cutting edge view is to not be overturned. And so that's where it stagnates even further. So make no mistake, technocracy will fail no matter what. And the problem that we have in messaging this is our educational system has taught people to think only in concretes. We don't have abstract thought. That's not part of the educational system. Rockefeller intentionally pushed this. He wanted workers. He wanted people on this 9 to 5.
The WHO ostensibly was to have healthy workers.
Yeah, is that healthy
They
workers?
already had their WHO. Places like Bar Harbor and Newport wouldn't exist, frankly, today. They wouldn't necessarily get formed the same way. But back in the kind of the Gilded Age in the early 20th century thereafter, there was no air conditioning extant in New York City. So they have hot, sweltering summers. And they would summer up in, Fairhaven and Bar Harbor, Maine, Kennebunkport, you name it, Cape Cod, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, Newport. And all these, big Victorian houses were built there, and they weren't worrying about their own health. They were fine. They could have the money to summer someplace else and winter someplace else and all that kind of stuff. So they could have they had the mobility to do what they wanted and get the best doctors. So with the WHO and that kind of thing was to kind of, as you said, it's not necessarily a bad idea per se. A lot of the things are not bad ideas.
Well, they're not bad ideas, but they're ideas that aren't allowed to coexist in a marketplace of ideas. This particular idea is one that is an all or nothing. It's kind of like, to your point, the WHO was originally, what was it, Huxley, not Aldous Huxley, his brother, was the first head of UNESCO, and he was a big eugenicist. Mm-hmm. Well, somebody could sit down and say, well, eugenics, well, sure, you would want to breed properly, but what did they end up doing? They ended up inbreeding, and they ended up creating all kinds of problems. So you take something that sounded like a great idea, and then it turned into an absolute disaster, which is why you can't give this kind of unilateral control.
It's a funny thing. Again, with Tracy Thurman yesterday, this concept came up, so it's a repeat for my regular listeners. But the oddity and the irony of technocracy is, if you had it, you wouldn't really get much more technology, because technology, technology is an application of science and ideas. But the real innovation that happens is through bubbling up, is through kind of a decentralized system where ideas can flourish. A lot of the best scientists left controlled places and came here so they could let their ideas flourish. And part of the reason we had the Manhattan Project we're able to create the bomb and have lots of innovations thereafter is because we had a society that allowed more individual liberty of thought and liberty of action and so forth, and liberty of company creation. The places that tend to the best places with the least regulation. But before we do that, I got one interjection to ask you, because my Windows security says, do you want to allow public and private networks to access this app? It's kind of a subheading. It says firewall has blocked some features of Xano or Zano, and we're going to get to this topic, but this is something we're going to segue to a little bit later about kind of a private wallet to get away from some of the scrutiny of these public CBDCs. So am I going to allow that? I assume I am.
Yeah, allow that.
Okay. So that screen disappeared. It was kind of blocking the action here. And it wouldn't move around. You can't move that screen. It's like getting my attention. So before we kind of move to other topics, and we're kind of halfway through our hour here, I did want to show this. This is from this. Speaking of acronyms, this is from the CBC, not the CDBC, but or CBDC, but the Canadian Broadcasting Company. So this is the Technocracy article they have, which covers a little bit of the history of the things you were mentioning. It's actually new to me. I had not really known there was such a thing as Technocracy Inc. From the 1930s, but it's interesting the way this gets soft pedal. I'm going to read this. Technocracy's ideology defies easy characterization. It was. They're talking about the 1930s version, anti-capitalist and anti-democratic, but not fascist. It was anti-government, but not libertarian. It believed in a radical form of social and economic equality, but it was not Marxist. They rejected all those ideologies because none of them accepted the idea that science and technology were transforming, and only highly trained engineers were capable of building a new North America. I mean, while other political parties and protest groups were touting plans for putting people back to work, Technocracy response was, don't even bother. The world has changed and the jobs destroyed by machines were not coming back. So maybe we could talk about what that actually is. What is the epithet or the label for that? I personally see that as kind of fascistic. But, it's kind of a putting into effect kind of corporatist ideas into the government structure, into the veins, kind of injecting corporatism into the governments, which I think is essential to fascism per se. That is the fascia, the bundling of all these different branches. But I'm wondering what you think, what label that is, and whether you see kind of an echo today in this, like, don't even bother having people work, kind of the universal basic income, and everyone should sit at home and kind of stew and kind of the I guess zoo, whatever the apt term for putting people in a zoo is, putting us in a corral, a farm, a zoo, having people being the commodity to be observed and watched, kind of not quite a gulag, but a nice gulag.
Yeah, I think techno-fascism might actually be a good way to explain it. And I will say one point, because you brought up the Canadian Broadcasting Company. Elon Musk's grandfather was the head of the Canadian Technocrat Party for some period of time. And actually, I will say, as a diversion, it is unpopular with a lot of people, but I actually think Elon Musk is absolutely a technocrat. And what I view his enhanced involvement with Trump and everything else as being just more of a push towards technocracy. I actually think that when you look at what he said he was going to do with Twitter, he was going to turn it into WeChat. WeChat is the basis of the social credit system in China. So he is very much, when you hear him say, oh, well, let's just apply these ideas to the budget. Let's apply these ideas to this. Let's, in his interaction with Trump, he said, well, we need to have these big moonshot goals that we're doing as a government. So he's pushing a technocratic agenda. And what's going on right now isn't Republican versus Democrat. In the ultimate, because as you said, I think fascism is a good way to look at this. In the end, the elites are going to carve this up. And the big battle is going to be who controls the technocracy. And right now you have the PayPal mafia, which is Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, and those related companies. So I would put Palantir and Musk's company as one of the, if we're in a multipolar technocracy world, that's one pole. Then you have Google in another, you have OpenAI and Microsoft in another, and then you have Facebook in another. And so they side with whoever is convenient politically and expedient politically to push their technocratic agenda, because ultimately what they're trying to do is get the laws changed to benefit their personal position and their corporation's position in this move to technocracy.
So I'm going to give Elon a kind of a vote of confidence. I think that I understand, and it's actually mentioned in this CBC article as kind of his his Mars shot being the moon shot that he desires technologically, but clearly his predilections, as we've seen with his managing of X. So what he actually does when the pedal hits the metal, the rubber hits the road, or the rocket hits the air, is promote adjudication by kind of crowdsourcing ideas and concepts. So I think he's actually been quite good at that, and with that, and letting and mind you, he didn't have to spend his time and money on X. He could have stayed behind the scenes and been as powerful as say Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg, whatever, just having his money play, or he could have been kind of a Donald Trumpian figure and pay off candidates, who help benefit him and so forth, and probably stick it out in California by virtue of siding with the power structure. So I think he has a clear maverick strain, and it's not a matter ultimately of kind of dissecting his mind, because I think there are always going to be forces that have their own interests. I mean, self-interest, it involves various selves, and we can't kind of block people off.
But the problem with that is there's self-interest in a rational self-interest in a free market, and then there's using the state and manipulating the state to push your agenda, which I abhor from anyone, including Musk. And the thing that I point out about this is, again, yeah, you could say, oh, he's heroic, he's staying behind the scenes, but what he's actually turning X into is the social credit system of WeChat. So this is actually an even bigger play and more control, because once he rolls out X payments, which by the way could end up being the basis for a CBDC in the United States, I mean, he's going to control payments. He's going to control information. If you look at what X transforms into, this wasn't a altruistic, I'm doing this to save free speech. He's doing this because he's basically going to be putting in the behemoth of what China has as a social credit system and digital currency system. And so again, I can appreciate what he does in the private market, but where it starts to blend, and I'll give you one example of this. So we had this whole issue about AI, and he went out and said, oh, we need to have open source AI. It's really important that we have open source. And then he goes and sues OpenAI. And he makes this whole play about he's always fought for open source, and this has been his whole push. And so then he sues OpenAI, and then they do discovery, and it turns out what he was actually trying to do was he was trying to get OpenAI for himself and buy it privately and push it through Tesla. So that to me was a very eye-opening experience, because it displayed, there's one side that he shows to the public in social media about being the hero of open source AI. And then there's what's actually going on in the documents, which is him basically having inside conversations about how he wants to take it for himself and roll it within Tesla. So that actually informed a lot for me, because it let me know his two-faced nature between what he says publicly and what he does privately. And I think it's very important that people look at this. And again, I can say, yeah, no, he's done a great job. But the problem with that is then all of a sudden, I don't like this white knight approach. Trump's going to save things. Elon's going to save things, because then what you end up doing is you end up giving power and control and rights, preferential rights to individuals. And that becomes the model moving forward. So in the future, when there are less capable people, they will still retain that control. That's what's damaging about
it. I'm a little bit more optimistic. Maybe I am generally, but I think it has to be there has to be a staging and training ground. Donald Trump will pass this mortal coil, and Elon Musk will pass his, kind of acquisitive phase. And so forth. People move through various stages of their own life. What we really want is the ability to have ideas percolate. And does X have the possibility of having some of the control aspects you're talking about? Well, sure. But, currently it has the only real conduit for exchange of ideas and debate and seeing enough different sides of problems that people can come up with reasonable and rational decisions.
Still within a limited context. It is still, I will tell you, and Chris Martinson backed this up as well. If you talk about the Federal Reserve or CBDCs on X, it is a shadow ban term. When I published the latest Zero Hedge article I had, I did a video on it, and my traffic went down 85% all across the board on X. And the content was outright restricted, and I got a label on it on TikTok. Nobody fact checked anything. The whole point of X was supposed to be we debate these ideas, and if the ideas are wrong, then the ideas get fact checked. Well, I've never been fact checked. Well, I was fact checked on one thing that was intentionally supposed to be a joke, but I've never been fact checked on any of my information regarding CBDCs. Specifically, this article, this Zero Hedge article, where I basically outlined the fact that we already have a CBDC, and now, and it's important that we acknowledge that, because politically, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, they're adding to the tyranny level. So there are very alarming things in this article, and I could understand how, if you want to preserve the existing system, you don't want this kind of information to get out to the public. And so let me say what I mean by this. So I've been for the last 2 years, I've been sounding the alarm bell on CBDCs, and this happened because I was a political activist, and then I exited politics to focus on crypto and using this technology behind crypto to get rid of third parties in other areas besides money. And that was my focus. And then COVID happened. And then all of a sudden, friends of mine who were big in crypto were being targeted by the federal government, were being arrested and having their businesses shut down. And so I wanted to look into what all of that was about. And when I looked into it, I determined that they are cracking down on crypto, which they are. It's current government policy under Biden's Executive Order 14067 to take a whole of government approach to regulating crypto. And they have been doing that. They're throwing people in jail. They're making it harder to use the stuff. And they're doing this because they don't want competition. Now, for what they're calling a CBDC, I'm saying what is an enhanced version of our existing CBDC. They don't want people to have an off-ramp because, I mean, historically, when there's a better form of money available, people will switch to that. And so they want to make sure that that's not possible because, again, their ultimate agenda is technocratic in nature. So after talking about this for a long time and seeing that, okay, these countries, there are now 134 exploring CBDCs. And when I do interviews, people ask me, well, what is a CBDC? And so, 18 months later, I think I now am beginning to have an answer because there is no official definition, but we are. So let's just look at the words themselves. A central bank digital currency. We have a central bank digital currency. The way money is issued in the United States today is the federal government issues an IOU to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then creates money out of thin air in a database. They use an Oracle database to create. So there's $100 million bond issued by the federal government, and the Federal Reserve creates $100 million accounting entry in an Oracle database. So that is a central bank digital currency. It is digital. It is issued by the central bank. I mean, it's so from a very specific way. And I don't think a lot of people think about this. In fact, I know a lot of people don't think about this because I've read the legislation and I've thought about this a bit. Our money supply is already 92% digital, and it's been growing more and more digital over time. But there's nothing that says you can't have a CBDC and paper currency. And so actually, I went through all of the elements of what are people worried about when people think CBDC. What are they concerned about? And one thing they're concerned about is financial surveillance, and you'll actually see all of these politicians talking about financial surveillance, from Ted Cruz to Elizabeth Warren, and we have to protect the American people. We can't have this CBDC. Well, again, we already have a digital currency. It's already issued by the central bank. And here are just some of the ways that it's already being surveilled today. Subpoenas and court orders, which is the least area that's employed. Financial Intelligence Unit requests, Bank Secrecy Act reporting. So automatically, if you do transactions of a certain level, it triggers reporting. There's the Patriot Act, which allows the government to do a whole variety of things without subpoenas and court orders. There's NSA bulk data collection on our financial transactions. There's something called national security letters, where they can actually come to you and seize your bank account. And they actually make it so that not only can you not talk about it publicly, you can't even talk to a lawyer about your situation. So that's called a national security letter. There are suspicious activity reports, civil asset forfeiture, data sharing agreements, SWIFT monitoring for international transactions, mutual legal assistance treaties. And then the most recent one is IRS AI monitoring. So when you read the contract that you have with your bank, the contract says, amongst other things, that they can sell or share your financial information. They can change the terms and conditions without consent. They can change fees without consent, and they can cancel your account without cause. So that is actually the current state of your banking relationship. And now with AI technology, they're doing this with the IRS. So for people out there that are thinking, oh, I'm afraid of CBDCs because I don't want, Ted Cruz said this is going to be about financial surveillance. Well, Ted Cruz reauthorized the Patriot Act. Ted Cruz, it's not the central bank. Everything that you're reading on the screen right now, these different elements of financial surveillance, the Federal Reserve didn't put this in place. Congress put this in place, or the executive branch, but mostly Congress put this in place. So it's almost as if Congress is trying to make it look like the central bank is the bad guy, which they are. They're a completely unnecessary entity that's running a Ponzi scheme, but they're not the ones implementing the surveillance infrastructure. So what I would say to people is, well, if the IRS is monitoring your transactions, and the NSA is monitoring transactions, and then they can come in without warrants and do more, and they can shut off your money, how much worse can it get? right? That's not a future CBDC to stop. That is the present system today. And I know several people, including myself, that have lost bank accounts or had funds frozen. I've actually shared some video clips. Nick Fuentes, who I'm not advocating for his personal beliefs, but he's had 5 bank accounts canceled. He's even had Bitcoin transactions seized, and he's never been charged with a crime. There's Dr. Joseph Mercola, there's an endless list. There's Operation Choke Point, where there are 24 different industries of merchants that have been basically denied access to bank accounts and credit card processing. So this isn't a future CBDC. This is a present situation. So it's already digital. It's already initially issued by the central bank. Now, we also have commercial banks that issue digital currency as well. So the government writes its checks on this digital currency in an Oracle database that's housed at the Federal Reserve. And then when you deposit that check into your bank has its own database, an Oracle database or a Microsoft database, and they create for every dollar deposited 10 additional digital dollars out of thin air. And then they have to keep a certain amount of reserves with the Federal Reserve. And so people will say, well, that's different. Now you have, but who owns the Federal Reserve? The commercial banks own the Federal Reserve. So people that are trying to say there's this differentiation because we have central bank digital currencies and commercial bank digital currencies, that's a difference without a distinction for me, because at the end of the day, it's the same level of tracking, and it's all digital, and it's all controlled. So I think that they're actually shifting the narrative on this. They're trying to more narrowly define CBDC to make everybody think that it's something in the future, so that they don't question how bad the current situation is today, because it is already bad. That's just the surveillance aspect. You also have the programmability. So then people say, well, the real difference is programmability. CBDCs would be programmable. Well, if you've ever used a health savings account or a flexible spending account, the largest provider of that is Optum Bank. So it's a bank. So you have an HSA card, and you can only use that HSA card for a certain pre-approved list of expenses, and you can only use it at certain stores. You may only be able to use it at Walgreens versus CVS. Well, guess what? That's programmable digital money. That's our existing banking system with programming on it. There's all kinds of programming that goes on every time you do a credit card transaction. Multiple checks are done. Things are flagged. So an Oracle database and a Microsoft database can already be programmed. People have been programming those for decades. And so as I looked into this, there's really, yes, they can add more levels of the tyranny, but it's already unacceptable in terms of the level of tyranny that we have with the what I'll call the CBDC today.
I get that. I'm going to put up this quote. It's not quite apt, but it's been on my mind. And I think it's reasonable. This is from some time ago. It's 40 years ago, at least. Government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. At the core of this is really the central part. Tax it. I think they want to have everything kind of summed up so they can tax it. But I think what you're talking about is going way beyond that. It's a matter of kind of geofencing. We have a dog here, and people who have dogs can have a literal fence if they want to leave the dog outside, or they can kind of have this geofence. It's shock collar tag. You embed some aspects in your lawn or whatever, and the dog won't go out because it's been trained, get the zap. I think that's where we're all headed. And again, it's kind of this turning people into a zoo, a menagerie with which to be played, and it's kind of like a horrible version of Hunger Games and so forth. That the foofy elites get to do what they want, and everyone else has to kind of struggle. But you're being monitored, you're being tabbed. And I'm sure there are a lot of similar dystopian movies that we can list along those same aspects. I don't know if you want to speak further on that, or kind of go to point out the answer, or at least maybe some temporizing aspect of the things you're promoting, propounding, and proposing.
Sure. Well, I'll just summarize quickly on this. So where we are today, and the article goes into this in much greater detail, but I'd say we're a 45 out of 200 on the CBDC tyranny index. So we already have surveillance from the NSA, Patriot Act, the IRS, and others. We already have a moderate level of control. There are already, checks spending restrictions and with things like HSAs. And we actually didn't, on the technocracy front, when I talk about an energy credit system moving forward, there's already something called a Autonomy MasterCard, which is something people sign up for today that it actually shuts off when you use too much carbon, which means that MasterCard's put together relationships with over 150 different companies. They're already tracking the impact of your financial transactions on carbon, and then they're already shutting off your access to money. So that technology infrastructure has already been built and is being expanded. So in case you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, this is all far off, you have to understand it already exists. People are already using it. This isn't far off, and it's not even just conceptual. So you're going to have, that's a great image. That it's a video there, but it actually shows this is from their own marketing materials. Transaction declined. You have exceeded your carbon limit. So that exists today. That's the end goal of an entire global digital currency. And then there's the question of the issuer. Are you just going to have a digital currency issued by the central bank, or are you also going to have commercial banks? But understand that in all of the implementations, including in China, one misconception is people think that a central bank digital currency means that your bank is going to go away and everybody is just going to have an account with the Federal Reserve. There is no implementation so far where that's been the case. Commercial banks are preserved in all implementations of CBDCs, regardless of who defines it. So that's not a defining attribute. But anyway, that's where we are today, which I would say is pretty bad. I think people should be alarmed about that. The current situation is pretty dreadful. But the ultimate state, to get to a 200 out of 200 on the CBDC tyranny index, you have total surveillance, AI-powered monitoring tied into a social credit system. It is issued by one central entity. It might not even be a central bank at that point, because you're talking about now a global digital currency, not one that is nationalized. Everything is tokenized, so I won't go to all the details, but right now we have centralized databases. Tokenization is just a different kind of way of looking at a database where things are more granularly structured and tied, tokenized and measured at the individual level. The control mechanisms are absolute. So what you can and cannot buy and when you can buy it is predetermined on a list and then further subdivided based on your social credit score. It's completely cashless, and it's one where all crypto has been banned. So that is essentially the end state. That is the final state of all of this. But where we are right now is, and I want to change the narrative on this, where we already have a central bank digital currency, and it's already bad enough that you should want to get out of it. Now, the solution to it, and this hasn't changed, I've been saying this the whole time. When you study currencies, what you'll find is every state-backed currency, fiat currency in human history has failed. It has a 0% success rate. The average fiat currency only lasts 27 years. Even the last 5 global reserve currencies, which is what the dollar is right now, only lasted 84 years. And if you look at the typical reasons why a fiat currency fails, the US is flashing bright red on all 7. Usually when a currency collapses, it may be for two or three different reasons. We're hitting all of them: excess debt, corruption, war, competition, technology. I mean, you go on and on down the list. And governments will even screw up precious metals. So when you look at the fall of Rome, I mean, at the end of Rome, a silver denarius was 0.05% silver. They'll literally debase the metal itself. So if fiat currencies never worked in human history, perhaps maybe we shouldn't try another fiat currency, which is why I like the idea of the separation of money and state. And so what I have been doing myself, I've been living on crypto, gold, and silver since 2019. And my book goes into how to do this, but I found that people want that next step. So I'm doing workshops around the country where I'm showing people how to use alternative assets that are separate from state as an alternative for this. And so, I mean, if you might be saying, I don't like crypto, or is crypto's no different than CBDCs, it's also precious metals. But when I say that, it's not. If somebody says, "Oh, the government's going to go back on the gold standard," or the latest news is Zimbabwe is going to the gold standard, who cares? Why do we believe this? The dollar was based on the gold standard until it wasn't. There's one commonality here: something being backed by something always gets manipulated by politicians. I mean, there's a 0% success rate of that working either. So this idea, like, we don't even know the amount of gold in Fort Knox, the idea that we would trust, a government to say that it's backed by something, that doesn't work. So you can actually use gold in physical form. I'm holding in my hand You can see this on the screen. This is a gold back. This is 1/1000th of an ounce of gold. This doesn't require any technology. They make these in different denominations. Everybody gets it. You don't have to be, technical. It's physical. It's gold in a physical, spendable form that isn't in a vault held by the government backing paper notes or anything. And so that's one thing. The other thing is crypto. And crypto, part of why I do workshops as well is, I like to say that, it's the 99% of crypto that make the other 1% look bad. Most of the projects are scams. And so you go back and look at, well, what is important? Well, you want to have something that is, that has a fixed supply, and that is, you want something that's private. This has turned out to be an important feature that Bitcoin does not have. It turns out you can track Bitcoin, and this is why a lot of people are in trouble. And by being able to track Bitcoin, that means you can actually flag and differentiate between different Bitcoin addresses, which means it's no longer fungible because one Bitcoin is not the same as another. So fungibility is actually a critical component of money. So Bitcoin is not an alternative to CBDCs. And so where I have spent my time, and this has been a shift since we last talked, is a real emphasis on privacy coins. If it's not private, then it doesn't really count as money. So it's a handful of cryptocurrencies. Zano is one that I like, which I'll talk about more for a variety of reasons. Monero, Zcash, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin. These are all cryptos that can have privacy. Only Monero and Zano are actually what is called privacy by default, meaning you don't have to take any additional steps as the user to make it private. Those other ones that I mentioned can be private, but it requires you to do some extra work. And in my opinion, money should be easy to use. If it's going to be a substitute, you shouldn't have to have 140 IQ and 15 years of development experience to use money. And unfortunately, a lot of crypto has been kind of tied up in that. It's like, oh, you can't use this complicated thing. Well, you're out of the club. And that's the wrong approach. So simplicity is key.
Yeah. It's tricky, for say the soccer mom or the latchkey kid. You can have a card. I've traveled abroad, 3 or 4 times in the last year, and none of those times have I used any of the local fiat currency of my destinations. And even beyond that, probably the last 7 or 8 times or years I've gone to Norway, Armenia. I was briefly in Qatar and what other countries? France, England, the Netherlands. Blah, 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 all kinds of places. And I haven't exchanged, any money, because I use my credit cards, and it's very convenient, and you don't have to worry about exchanges and all that kind of stuff. It all comes adjudicated. You can kind of keep track of expenses. And then, traveling around, I pretty much just go with, I was listening to Adam Sandler's song, Phone Wallet Keys. And he's, 3 things he needs. And he keeps adding to those things, a little, passport and this and that. Anyway, but the essential, but I've kind of narrowed it down just to phone. My phone is my key to my car. My phone, gets me in and out of a lot of other places. I have my credit cards attached to the phone, so I don't really have a wallet. And my house, I can get in one way or another with codes. So it kind of eliminates. It's very nice. It's a nice thing. I don't necessarily want to carry around more things. I could see adding the Zano wallet and so forth, but it has to be transactional. Most of these things, fiat, the whole essence of currency is that it has to be, like a current of a stream. It has to be moving, and it has to be current as far as it's contemporary and usable. So if you and I have the secret way of, exchanging value, I have to want something from you and vice versa. But, most of the time I'm going to want something from, one of the other, 7 billion people on Earth, or, a couple of different, hundreds of millions of different transaction places on Earth. And it's nice if we all both speak the same language, and certain types of currency, credit cards seem to be that language. And certainly I think people are going to wind up with the ease and comfort of using what most everybody uses. So, how does this...
Well, they will, except that what you're talking about is going to be what is completely programmed and controlled. You will not your credit cards are not going to become
fair enough. So it's going to be a resistance movement.
Your credit cards are already largely, depending upon what you're doing, controlled. You go travel somewhere and it gets shut off. You may have
absolutely no. That happened. I was in Aruba over the summer. All of a sudden, nothing was working, and it turns out they had asked me some question. I'd get all these kind of political junk texts, and I had flipped their query into that bin, and I trashed it. And so they were asking about some transaction I'd done the week before, whatever. And so they turned me off. Yeah, I mean, it's a trick sometimes. And yes, I understand there's going to be kind of a massaging of people's behavior. You know, who knows how? I mean, I don't think it works out well. You know, you know, that old joke. You know, people are revolting. You know, I've known that for some time. You know, it's kind of misinterpreted, double entendre of the word. I think the elites, you know, see the people as revolting. You know, unpalatable and whatnot. But at some point, they might literally be revolting. In Sri Lanka, again, this is from Tracy Thurman's talk with me. You know, and I was aware of it at the time. You know, not that long, within this year, they I think overthrew the government because they wanted to make farmers use, you know, only quote unquote organic fertilizer, take away all the type of, you know, ways they were able to make crop and feed people. You know, so when the government gets out of hand, you know, people will get, you know, down on the government. It doesn't always work. I mean, Venezuela, you know, it's top down management and go to hell, you know, seems to be the answer. And China seems to be getting away with a lot of stuff, and probably leadership in this essential movement. You know, how does it all wind up? I know, stay tuned. But how do you see it? Let's say social credit becomes a larger and larger, you know, arm twist, and getting people, you know, to be the good, you know, little doobies that they want to be, or, you know, the kind of zoo animals and cattle or whatever that you know, the elites see them as. You know, won't the mere kind of not using this, won't that kind of signal a flag that you are not part of the grid and that you will be shut off in some other ways? I mean, how does it all play out?
Well, we either fight and defeat technocracy, or we submit to it. There is no coexistence with the technocracy. This is something that's very important for people to understand. So yes, we need to have resistance to this. Now, as to the Xana wallet itself, I gave you that as kind of an early experimental version of this, but they're integrating it. So I'm like you, I travel with my phone. I have one wallet called Cake Wallet that I can have multiple cryptocurrencies in. I can actually buy gift cards within the wallet and then spend the gift cards, or if the merchant accepts the crypto directly. So they're easy to use wallets. And then the big missing piece now is a point of sale system for merchants, where merchants can accept multiple forms of payment, different cryptos and gold and silver. But yeah, we have to use these the only way to beat this is to use alternatives. There is no political solution, which we didn't go into, but I could go. The Republicans are no different than the Democrats. And when you go through and you look at the CBDC tyranny index, what is being proposed by the Republicans is equally as bad as the Democrats. And it's in different language that people haven't read the bills. I've read the bills. The Republicans are pushing anti-privacy coins. They're pushing more tracking and regulation. They're pushing to have private cryptocurrency on a common ledger with digital currency. And their way of saying that they're not issuing a CBDC is by promoting legislation that gives commercial banks the exclusive right to create stable coins. And what this means is the private companies that have created, you know, basically tokens that are backed by or represent a dollar one-to-one, those are going to be put out of business, and the commercial banks are going to get the exclusive ability to issue digital programmable money. That's indistinguishable from a CBDC, from an end user perspective, from a tracking perspective, from a surveillance perspective. Giving commercial banks exclusive rights to issuing digital tokens and stable coins is the same as a CBDC. But people don't know what these terms are. And so people are like, oh, the Republicans are against financial surveillance. And actually, they're worse. The worst thing that could happen is we get complete Republicans or complete Democrats. But in reality, this Cynthia Lummis, senator from Wyoming, has proposed a strategic reserve. You know, so this is an example. If I came to you and I said, hey, listen, Nancy Pelosi just suggested we use $1 trillion worth of taxpayer money to buy her stock portfolio and hold it for 20 years, what would your response be, right? People would be outraged. Well, she owns $500,000 worth of Bitcoin, and that's exactly what she's proposed. And what we're supposed to think that's not a free market concept. It's actually complete cronyism. And once you realize that Bitcoin is a hijacked asset that is surveillable, and the hijacking of it was funded by Jeffrey Epstein through this group at MIT, then you realize it's actually an even worse proposition. And I think Trump has gotten bad advice on this because he's been pushing it as well. So So there's no political solution to this. Both parties are proposing things that add to the tyranny index, just very clearly. And the next article I do for Brownstone is I'm actually going to break out the bills that have been proposed so that people understand this. Because as I've said before, nobody reads bills, including the people that vote on them. But you could put a blockchain freedom USA bill together. And the subject of the bill, the text of the bill could say, we're going to round up everybody that has self-custody crypto and put them in front of a firing line. And most people would still cheer on the bill. There was actually a study done. We sign click wrap agreements all the time, 150 to 400 click wrap agreements. So, the Microsoft user license, or Amazon has a 12,000 word contract when you sign up for an Amazon account. Nobody reads this. In fact, by the way, you couldn't, because if you read every word of these click wrap agreements, it would take you 1 hour per day, 365 days a year. So this is what happens at all levels. So we've basically given away our rights. We've done this voluntarily by clicking this, and Congress does this as well. Congress doesn't read the bills, but all of the bills are kind of anti-freedom. So the resistance against this is to stop using their money. And so these alternatives, the good news is people already use digital cash. It's already 92% digital. The only problem has been within the crypto community not developing user-friendly interfaces, which is a solvable situation. But if you had a point of sale system and a wallet that was on your phone that was as easy to use or better than what is being put out with CBDCs, then it's not a hard decision for merchants or individuals to make, especially if they're actually interested in freedom. But this is why I've advocated for this, and I understand it may be out there as a proposition, but I've yet to see anybody give me any convincing argument that anything is being done to stop technocracy. And when you dig in and you look at what's actually once you understand that we already have a CBDC and you understand how far gone it is in terms of surveillance and tracking, and then once you realize, you look at that Doconomy MasterCard as that's the end goal. Everything is that Doconomy MasterCard. So they already have the prototype of what it looks like. That's where everything is heading. Everything is heading. That's a social credit-based system where financial transactions are tied to behavior. That already exists. No technology upgrade needs to happen. So there isn't I guess the big punchline I would have here is no technology. The government doesn't have to pass a law to change technology to get what everybody is concerned about from a CBDC. The technology already exists and it's already been implemented in various ways, whether it's HSAs, FSAs, or the Doconomy Energy Credit MasterCard. That's, by the way, co-branded with the UN and the Climate Change 13 little logo literally on the card.
Well, I would, again, semi-optimistically push back. There's an old joke about Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are driving us, down a mountain into a canyon at full speed, and the Republicans are going the same direction, but they have their foot on the brake. They're both, very much likely to head in the same destination, but there's sort of a time lag with the Republicans. I don't think they have quite the same verve and say techno-fascist ideals at this point. The Democrats didn't always, I don't think, but at this point.
But here's the thing about that's only helpful if you're building an alternative.
I agree. So that was I was going to segue to my second or third point, which is that as far as the interface part, I'm a Neanderthal. I walked coincided with pterodactyls and whatnot back in the day. And when I went to Europe the first time, I got these traveler's checks. I think they're American Express and Barclays Bank and this and that. And so I'd have a certain amount that I prepaid, and I carry these checks around, and $50, $100 aliquots. I would buy stuff in France or England or whatever. And that was, when I ran out of those, I was out. I'm not sure I even had credit cards back then. It was in the 1970s. But couldn't there be like an easy interface between your Xano and say, some, I don't know, American Express per se, or a little buy-in, kind of immediate buy-in to your credit card, and your credit card becomes that immediate sliver so that you can buy stuff. So if you're sitting
So there is. So I've been living on this stuff for a while. There's a tiered way of doing this. So I can actually buy debit cards from within my Cake wallet using crypto.
Right.
That's
exactly what I was saying.
So that exists today, and that's part of what I've been doing, and that is part of the transition. But that can't be the end game, because that can be shut off, right? So at the end of the
cards,
day,
when you'd have a whole range of places from which to buy debit cards. If you were on a marketplace, let's say American Express turns you off. I mean, theoretically, there's going to be 15 other banks, and if you're sitting, on the beach in Aruba, there might be a Bank of Aruba that's happy to take your money or your Bitcoinish stuff.
Well, yeah. And by the way, it's like that with gift cards. I often do gift cards. Like, I took my kids to go see a movie. I used Monero, which is a privacy coin, to buy an AMC gift card, and then went and.
But that's cumbersome because the gift card doesn't know. I mean, is it exactly you're going to buy a gift card for $28.87 to include the soda and the tax? I mean,
you can. You can actually buy. It depends on the gift card, but yeah, you can buy the exact level. There's this thing called.
And that doesn't. I mean, that sounds like work. Again, it sounds like a college degree.
Well, I wouldn't say it's college degree. I mean, people are used to buying.
People don't learn that much in college these days. Maybe just kind of a tech savvy.
Well, nobody learns anything in college, but except how to not do the right thing. But I would say that
you have to learn how to drink beer and party. I mean, I think you're kind of.
I'm underselling the $200,000 of debt. but what I'm saying is you can do it today, but there's a phased transition. So look at it this way. I'm trying to build something, and there's an easy to use wallet, easy to use point of sale system. Those are the key things that are necessary to make all this work. And I have to express this to everybody. Everybody's like, well, grandma's not going to understand this. Look, all technology goes in phases through an adoption curve. There are the innovators, which is 2.5%. Then you have early adopters, which is 13%. And then you get to early majority, late majority, et cetera. So everybody sits, and a lot of people say, well, this won't work because they think of somebody, a normie in their imagination right now that wouldn't be willing to adopt this today. But that's not how technology ever gets adopted. That's not how we got credit cards. That's not how we have any of the things that we use today. So right now, what I'm focusing on is getting the wallets and the point of sale systems and working with the groups that already understand this. Because you know what? Food freedom people understand this. Health freedom people. There are 22 categories of businesses that have already been targeted by the federal government. These people, that's a really easy sell because they've already been shut off.
Right.
It's the rest of the world that...
Well, let's say we'll call it, grossly speaking, kind of a church-based or faith-based concept. Just like the Amish live a little bit off the grid. Some of the people who are government skeptical and government bruised and so forth. So that brings up my third point that I was trying to get to about Republicans versus Democrats, which is that if this is going to be a social credit system one way or another somehow along the line, it at some point depends on what your social values are. And you might have the Democrats' version of social values, and you might have the Republicans, and you might have something, on one side or another or in between. But you have to kind of push your values. Politicians, are politicians. And if your values are firm enough, they will mold to those over time because they have their own kind of social credit system of reelection. Maybe over time they won't. So I'd like you to touch on that. And I guess we've kind of gone over the hour, but I'd like to maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes more and talk about something you brought up way earlier about money being a separate system from politics. I kind of see the EU as a bait and switch, a huge bait and switch. It was supposed to be a common currency for the euro, and then it winds up being this massive, kind of like Frankensteinian monster government without representation, and everyone's kind of a European now, and the national borders disappear. So I'm just curious. I mean, again, you can take either one or both of these questions, like who determines the social and social credit? The UN. I think we have a sense of WHO sensibilities, kind of this, kind of leftist, progressivist version, transhumanist, and who knows what else coming down the road towards us. We'll call it techno-fascist, and then the other one would be, how money becomes kind of the Trojan horse for a lot of these concepts.
So I guess I'm going to write an article about this. This is in the queue. We already have a social credit system, just as we already have a CBDC. And the people that are pushing it are the same people that push the Republicans. Republicans and Democrats don't have control. I've run PACs and political organizations. None of these politicians have any of the control. It's all controlled by who controls the money to get them elected. They don't write the bills, by the way. People ought to ask, but Cynthia Loomis didn't write her bill. They should be required to disclose who wrote the bills, because these bills are written by the lobbyists and the bankers and everybody else. It's always been that way. Even the people who are the prime sponsors of the bill didn't write the actual bills. And so, but we already have a social credit in the US. And what my article is going to focus on is, if you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of the UN, you can actually map it to tax policy. Our social credit system is through tax policy. Even something like the 401k, which is, by the way, a scam. And we haven't even had time to talk about the great taking and the fact that actually we don't own the stocks, bonds, and 401ks in our portfolio. We legally don't own them. We don't vote the shares. And when there's a financial collapse, it is the secured creditors that will end up owning all of our assets. And so that's actually an important topic to discuss, but and not a well understood one. But if you look at the 401k, well, how does it work? Well, through tax policy, there's matching funds from the employer that you can put in a certain amount pre-tax, and you're penalized if you take it out before you're 59 and a half years old. How is that not a social credit score? How are the way that we handle student loans, the way we differentiate with healthcare expenses, everything in the tax code is an element of a social credit system. We just don't have a good user interface. We just have a lot of bureaucracy. Our social credit system is, 100,000 pages of text with no user interface, whereas China at least has a friendly user interface. But our tax code is weaponized, and it already is a social credit system. And I'm going through now and looking at, because I'm curious about these things. Where did 401ks come from? Well, it came from the Revenue Act in the 1970s with a Democrat-controlled Congress under Jimmy Carter. And so you look through who actually pushed that at the time, and then who was behind that. And then it's like, oh, wow, we just have these assumptions about my 401k is my retirement, and I don't even think about it. Most people don't know what's in their 401k. There are people that will be advocates all day long against the COVID vaccine and all for vaccine choice and not realize they have Moderna and Pfizer in their portfolio. I mean, this is the system that we already have set up. So for the big blocks of our economy, it's already predetermined. So I don't think again, I'm going to go back to the Republican Democrat thing is irrelevant. This is technocracy elements versus technocracy.
I don't think it's irrelevant, because I think that in order to have freedom, it's not just the money thing. I think you need the First Amendment, you need the Second Amendment. And
we haven't had those in large. The Bill of Rights has been shredded since.
No, I understand, but if you have somebody who willingly has in public has talked about gun confiscation is like the first order of business, and you can either vote that president or the other one. One is tending towards individual liberty, and the other is not.
No, I know. Trump was worse in actuality about guns than Biden was. He actually passed the bump stock ban. You can go back and look at there's a whole misconception here. Apparently people forgot about living through Trump's term, or actually looking at what he passed and didn't pass. He was actually worse on guns than Biden, not necessarily in terms of stated policy. So again,
the current election is between Kamala Harris and him. And she's talked literally about gun confiscation, like, house to house kind of thing. And Raphael Warnock, is kind of in her, coterie there, and said, yeah, that's first order of business. I mean, that, it remains to be seen. I think one has a tendency to do it and the other doesn't.
So I guess I would go back to this. Your analogy of we're heading off a cliff. It's a question of whether you're pushing on the brakes or not. If people aren't going to start diverting energy to working on an alternative and are going to continue to believe that playing within the two poles is going to be a survivable solution, then we should collapse faster, because we're literally
So let me ask you how things are playing out in the UK. Just as a slight prologue. They have basically a two-party system. They have the Conservatives and the Labour, and the Conservatives let people down in the way you're suggesting. I think they're worse than our Republicans, but in the way you're suggesting Republicans do. And they're all part of the uniblob, globalized coterie. I get it. Okay, fine. They had their pseudo-Trump, Boris Johnson. I think he was, fake and, made out of, cotton candy and whatever. And so the voters said, okay, it's kind of like the Soviet myth about, you pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. You're not represent. The conservative voters said, you don't represent us, we're not going to come out and vote. And so they didn't. And so far as they had a very, very low turnout, and they split their vote. They went to Reform UK, and lo and behold, they got worse. They got Keir Starmer, and he's on our list there as part of the Trilateral Commission, by the way. And they have kind of a much worse tyranny than the Conservatives. So Conservatives bad. I get it. Okay, the Labour much worse, and you have to live through it if you can live through it. They're corralling people. They have two-tier Keir, they're corralling people based on political views. It's kind of the George Floyd paradigm. If you're, protesting George Floyd and you're in that demographic, you're all, to be applauded and whatnot. If you're kind of basically the white version of George Floyd, they had the 3 girls killed, and you're doing George Floyd-like protests for the same basis, and you're paler, then you are kind of January 6th, if that's a verb, impaled. And that's the end of you. And then, I guess, Solzhenitsyn went to the Gulag. He was a tough guy, and he had his religion and faith, and ultimately the Soviet Union fell. But not everyone can wait for that. No one has that kind of stamina and patience. And it's a tough proposition. People need to live day to day, no pun intended on your name. But it's like, how do we all do that? And it's like, I think there's a very, so I've got a lot of libertarian friends, and, they always, in Massachusetts, doesn't matter for whom they vote, because we're, pretty much, aside from Ronald Reagan's second term, we pretty much only go one way in presidential elections. So fine, they have an easy choice here. But in other places, it's analogous for me to like going to the Super Bowl, and you have the, you can bet on the Chiefs or the 49ers, say, and you come wearing a Jets jersey. You're voting for somebody. It's a binary choice in that Super Bowl. And you can, figure out how you want to profit by it or who you want to root for. But to go with a team that's not even in the running and can't win the game unless somehow the Jets team managed to, impale the 49ers and put on their uniforms, it's a tough proposition. And so what you're winding up with is 5 years of tyranny in the UK or longer.
So I guess, again, I'm going back to, it doesn't matter. Don't bet on or watch the Super Bowl. Build an exit. No, I'm very serious about this. Literally, if we don't exit and build, we have nothing. We're bought into a system of a popularity contest for who's going to be our slave master mascot for another 4 years. And whether it's slower or faster into tyranny doesn't matter if you're not building an alternative to tyranny. Here's why. Here's what the default is. The default is the one world global technocracy backed by energy credits and a social credit system. There is billions of dollars, and there are hundreds of thousands of people that are working on that agenda every day. We're sitting here battling it out, thinking that, we're arguing over which side in this rigged polarity contest we're going to pick. And at the end, what we get is a slower march towards one world technocracy or a faster march. But here's the thing, unless we build an alternative to the one world global technocracy, we lose either way. So if we're not actually spending time figuring out what's next, and we're spending all of our time thinking we have to pick one of these two, we lose by default. That is actually how we lose. This is why I'm doing so. Not only moving into alternative currencies defunds them. That is actually one thing that, like, if people woke up tomorrow and actually moved out of the dollar, it would defund the tyranny. Like, we literally allow this to happen.
Okay, so let's say tomorrow you decide you want to move from place A to B, and you want to sell your home. Are you going to only be working within the realm of buyers who have Monero to buy your home?
I don't even care. I got out of my home.
Okay.
Let's go back to like the founders of this country. Like, if we're not going to risk something, if it's like, understand the default is they'll get us slice by slice. All of a sudden it's like, I don't want to lose my house. And then all of a sudden, you're in a carbon, eminent domain because you're in a carbon area, and then your house gets taken away from you. And most people will sit in fear, voting in these rigged elections, having slice by slice taken away every 4 years.
Right.
When you look at how much if you look at the Bill of Rights and you actually dissect where it is, then you look at $35 trillion in debt, and then you look at how surveilled our financial system is right now. I mean, where's the Fourth Amendment when you look at what I described with our current banking system? It's already gone. We're 95% gone. People are holding on to a belief that America is something that it hasn't been for 25 years. And so they're actually protecting and trying to salvage the denatured version of the thing.
Yes, but in the meanwhile, there's going to be an election, and you can sit it out, I guess, but you have to put the brakes on some things. There are multiple different axes by which things suck. I was actually literally at the dentist's office today, and she had one of those suction things in my mouth. They spray and they pour water, and they're doing all kinds of stuff in there. And I was thinking, pretty much the job description could be that you suck, in this case, literally sucking stuff out. But, there's a lot of things that suck out there, not in the dental hygienist polite way of getting detritus from your mouth, but I was listening to, I think 15 million people or more have listened to this woman's plaintive cry in front of the Springfield, Ohio city council or something like that, where her literal front yard has been taken over by, waves of Haitian immigrants, and they're eating in the neighborhood. They're eating the cats and dogs, and they're putting their mattresses on your lawn. There's lots of other ways that things are potentially tumbling down much faster. Whether it's, kind of Antifa revolution, Chinese take over Taiwan and potentially elsewhere, the currency dropping. I mean, there's lots of different threads out there. And I think, as far as this, election that will take place with or without your participation, there's a pretty blatant choice, for as far as, the RFK, Make America Healthy Again agenda, all this other kinds of things that, we have to temporize. It's not to say you can't do your exposition and theories as well, but in the meanwhile, there's a battle to be fought. And I think, America, getting harassed into harassment would be a worse situation, would be akin to the UK, and the various rights that we have reserved that the UK actually doesn't, because they don't actually have a constitution and so forth, will dissipate, quicker. Anyway, that's kind of my thought on it.
So I actually I've tried to pound this home at the last couple of brownstone retreats, because two retreats ago that people were like, DeSantis is going to win. I'm like, DeSantis isn't going to win, and I'll explain why. And then people are like, RFK can actually win, and I'm like, you're effing nuts. He had no chance. Do you know why?
That's my Super Bowl analogy right there.
But here's why, though. It's the Super Bowl analogy. The reason why is 74% of Americans can't identify the three branches of government. 50% of Americans don't know what the Electoral College is. Only 30% of eighth graders passed a civics test. 28% passed a history test. The voter is no to low information. Elections are won by big data and AI from party machines. It has nothing to do with policy, and it has nothing to do with candidates. And no matter who's elected, they can't fix it because of how corrupt.
Right. Well, the populace may not deserve anything better. So let me ask you a separate question. Your kids, you mentioned peripherally, so you have kids, and by the nature of that word, I assume they're in school. On whose turf are they getting schooled?
On whose turf? Well, I mean, they went to Montessori school, and now they're going to a private school for high school. But
it's the same kind of thing. I mean, there's your physical property, there's your intellectual property. I think that a lot of things have been co-opted. It's just a tough world out there. I think we're under threat. I think liberty is under threat on multiple different parameters.
I think liberty, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is liberty is actually already gone. And we're not actually acknowledging how bad this is. We're not acknowledging where our constitutional rights are. We're not acknowledging, and people don't know how much, for instance, our money is being surveilled and tracked and cut off. And the thing, look, my issue with this about the election is that, I guess, if you asked me the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I would say yes, because 4 years ago we had lockdowns. 4 years ago we had mandates. 4 years ago, more money was printed under Trump than under Biden. $7.8 trillion was added to the deficit under Trump. What I don't understand is this guy had a track record. So this idea, like, have we forgotten about his track record?
Okay. I think there's an asterisk there, because again, his Achilles heel clearly was that he listened to those experts. And this was, I think they were trying to get him in a number of different ways. He was skeptical enough to, turn down the Paris Accords, skeptical enough to turn down the JCPOA, and he, I think, was initially skeptical enough to turn down COVID. And if you listen to his words of early March, he said this is blow by and whatnot. I think there was a meeting, and I think he was given a bill of goods that people should have known better. I've got an article or two or three on Brownstone on that topic. But I think we maybe have to have you back on again and cover more of this. I don't know if you're going to be in Pittsburgh for Brownstone event, but maybe we can talk.
No, I'll be there.
But I'd like to, end with maybe just a couple last words from you, and I want to maybe put up some, background material here that people can find you. Here is daylightfreedom.org. That's your group, and there's ways to figure this out, including donate button here.
I know the donate button doesn't actually work, but this is more about the build is I call it the Manhattan Project, to build a wallet and a point of sale system that's easy to use, that's competitive with CBDCs. The Empower area is the workshops that we're doing across the country. So we're, the next one we have is New Jersey on October the 5th. We're going to be in Omaha on November the 9th. And then we just announced today Nashville on December the 14th. And so this is a good way to do this. I guess my ending thought is this: regardless of what happens with the election, it is a slow or fast march to tyranny, and we know what the end game is. This end game of a global technocracy is not a theory, or it's not a conspiracy theory. It's in their own documents, in their own materials, in their own words. That is the default. So we have to understand that unless we do something else, that's the default. So whether we're doing the slow fail or the fast fail, my thing that I want to say to everybody is we have to start putting attention on building the alternatives. So we make 35,000 decisions as human beings every single day. One choice in November, one decision in what I would argue is a rigged polarity contest is not as material as the decisions about what you make deciding your own health, what currencies you use, and starting to build alternatives. And we have to start allocating some amount of time to that, because if we're just spending all of our time worrying about and analyzing whether we're going to fail slow or fail fast, what are we failing slow or fast into? We have to have the alternative. And this country was founded on first principles. This country was founded on people who debated first principles. And I've been trying to get people to kind of open up to this idea. Let's revisit those first principles. Have we learned anything in 250 years? Let's go back to first principles.
So do you buy into, are you a founderist?
What does that mean?
I just made the word up, so a little bit tricky. Do you ascribe to the American Foundation, the American founders' ideas? Did they have good ideas? Or when you say look back to those, do you want to rewrite them, or do you want to have people kind of get more knowledgeable and adopt them?
I think they were brilliant at the time, but I think to not actually revisit them from first principles and debate them after 250 years is probably a bad idea. And I will say this for the following reason. If they were alive today, they would say, burn it down. That is my belief based on what I've read of the founders. They would look at this in absolute horror about what has happened to this country.
Yeah, but burning it down is a tricky proposition.
Well, I mean, I guess not necessarily burning it down. Well, I mean, whatever.
No, I understand what you meant, but the way they burnt it down was by going to war. And many of them lost their lives, and had they lost the war, they would have lost their lives entirely. I mean, obviously you lose your life, it's entire, but the whole bunch of them would have been rounded up and put away. So they put their lives on the line for principles. And I understand things. Anyway, it's an interesting proposition. My only issue is that if you went back to first principles of today, I'm not sure people are principled. I don't think they have necessarily the same backbone. People, have decided kind of religion's an outmoded modality of thought and whatnot, and they think they have they think they have something better. But most of the time, it's some secular version of religion. It's a wokeism, for instance, and all other different kinds of this all the kind of pablum put out on the UN little set of stamps there that people have these little ideologies. Climate, I think climate is a religion. I think, kind of the cult of Greta and that kind of stuff. And so if we went back to first principles, it would really, the answers to every question is it depends on whose principles. And I think personally the founders, contextually that, from our perspective, they might have, everyone brings up slavery, but I think on the whole, they had kind of a firmer grounding in philosophy and moral failings than perhaps we do here today.
But at the same time, I had the privilege of speaking at G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill Expo and had an opportunity to chat with him. And what he actually said was similar to what I'm saying, is that America was the 0.5%, then getting the 3%, then getting to 15%. That's how we won the American Revolution. So nothing is ever done with 50% plus one. So any of these things solved at the ballot box is not. My only problem is we had a food fight right now. I think Antifa might come out ahead, and that would be kind of a bad thing. We have a revolution. We might want to wind up with the French Revolution, not the American. I guess what I'm suggesting is we should get some of us together that are principled and philosophical to have that conversation, to begin that conversation, because I've looked at, I actually started doing this. I started writing an article out. I actually gave a presentation about this, and I was looking at kind of the foundational principles and then how those foundational principles were translated to governing principles. And then when you actually start looking back at this, well, right, how does this account for AI? I would argue that, and again, even in taking this approach, my approach isn't I have a better way. I actually have a whole bunch of questions that I think it would be good to get people that are intelligent on multiple sides of the issue to debate these things, to actually begin to have a debate, because we don't have an answer to 15-minute cities. So as we're slow or fast failing,
I'm going to go with 20-minute cities.
Well, whether it's 20-minute cities, but when that failure happens and they roll out something concrete, what are we rolling out? Are people?
Well, that is always the problem. That's exactly the problem I mentioned before about affirmative action and diversity and all this kind of stuff. They come up with the ideas. They have the idea factory, but until you kind of take back some of the institutions or making new ones, I think it's the same issue. So, Andrew Clavin talks about this all the time, that the culture is won at the cultural level.
Well,
so you can't just keep fighting all the time. You have to have your own institutions, your own ways of putting the word out, your own movies, your own this and that. So there can be the debate of ideas. But insofar as there is a debate of ideas, I do think X is the place where it's happening right now. I'm going to have to end. My dog is literally barking. I got to get moving with things. And I want to, before I leave, give a slight self-promotion, if I may. This is... if you want to help support my podcasting, you go buy my book. It's even better if you read it after you buy it, and read it and buy it, and then leave a nice review, or tell me what's wrong with it. But this is about the Zika microcephaly pandemic. And I was mentioning to Tracy Thurman yesterday that it coincides with some of these concepts we talked today, insofar as as its technocracy. This was listen to the experts, boondoggle. We didn't really have it hit home the same way COVID did, but there were all kinds of gross miscarriages of justice and liberty happening throughout Brazil and parts of the Americas, plural, at the time. And the people were told not to have kids until there was a Zika vaccine. 10 years later, there's no Zika vaccine. There would be no kids if people had listened to those experts. Insofar as they did, there was misery, and there's been a declining birth rate in all kinds of places in Northeast Brazil, and kind of a dearth of kids because people listened to this thing, Zika microcephaly conception, which was never scientifically proved, and people ran with it. Didn't have the quite cute phrasing of affirmative action and whatnot, but it had its own method to its madness, and people glommed onto this politically because they saw it as a means to overturn the abortion constraints in Brazil and Latin America as a whole. So people, manipulated this concept and aggrandized it and put it out there in kind of a macabre and ghoulish way. So if you want to help learn more about this and fight back against the man who puts this out, buy my book and we can talk about it. I have a webpage, randybach.com, and you can contact me there, and on X at Dr. Randall Bach.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. I hope to see you soon. I appreciate this, and stay around for a second. We'll chat. Thanks for everybody. Thank you, Aaron.